He used my name to steal my future, so I used his secrets to erase his life. This isn't about justice. It's about balance. My name is Elias Warren. I'm 61 years old, and I thought I'd finally made peace with the past. I live alone in a salt-weathered house near Oak Ridge Bay, North Carolina. Not much goes on here, boats creak on the water, gulls scream like they're warning you about something, and the wind off the Atlantic is the only voice that doesn't lie to you. I built this place after my wife died. Sandra, cancer, slow, and mean. Took her voice first, then her hands, then the rest. That woman made life feel less sharp. When she left, the world went blunt and colorless. So I found the edge again in structure and solitude. I made my house from reclaimed wood and sweat. No contractors. No corners cut. Just me, my hands, and the cold ache of loss. For the past 5 years, I'd been living on my pension, a few freelance consulting gigs with retired engineers, and peace. Honest peace. And I would have kept on that way too. But then a letter arrived, crisp envelope, bold font. A debt collection notice for a $37,000 business line of credit. Problem was, I hadn't opened a business in over a decade. I hadn't borrowed a dime in 6 years. I thought it was a scam, some phishing trick. But the company was real, based in Asheville. The account number was real. And then came the second letter from the county office saying there was a pending lien on my house due to unpaid taxes from a property I'd never seen. Then the third blow hit me square. My savings account gone. Emptied. Frozen for investigative review. I stared at the letter in my trembling hands, and the only sound in the room was the old floor fan pushing stale summer air across the hardwood. The bastard had taken everything. It took me 4 days and 3 sleepless nights to piece it together. His name was Troy Landon, 34 years old. Ran a string of shell companies up and down the Carolina coast. Smooth talker. High credit risk. And he'd been using my identity, my social security number, my name, even an old military photo that he'd somehow gotten his hands on to run it all. But it wasn't just some random cybercriminal in another state. No. Troy was the son of Alan Landon, a man I once called my brother in arms. Vietnam veteran. We bunked side by side in fire bases soaked with mud and diesel smoke. Alan died in 2001. I'd gone to his funeral. I'd shaken Troy's hand when he was still in college. The kid had soft hands and a rich man's watch even back then. So how the hell did he get my information? Sandra's safety deposit box. That's my guess. She kept everything, including my military records and insurance paperwork. After her funeral, Troy helped me close the bank account, offered, like some stand-up young man. Said his firm handled estate closures. I was too broken to care. And that's how the vulture got in. The funny thing is, I didn't get angry. Not in the way people expect. I didn't throw furniture or scream at a wall. I got still. That dangerous kind of stillness you see in the ocean right before a storm rolls in. Because I knew something Troy didn't. I spent 28 years designing airframes for military contracts. Systems no one outside of Pentagon clearances has ever seen. I've dissected Russian avionics with a ballpoint pen and turned encrypted logs into maps. My mind works like a blueprint, step by step, no motion wasted. So I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to unbuild him, the way you disassemble a failing structure. Quietly. Precisely. And once the last bolt is loose, you let gravity do the rest. I started simple. Information. Old habits kicked in. I pulled public business filings, tax returns. I accessed county clerk records in 4 cities. I dug into his LinkedIn, his Instagram, and every article he ever liked on Twitter. The man was careless. His face was everywhere, charity events, wine tastings, real estate deals. All for show. I traced a luxury boat lease to Charleston and a failed investment pitch to Wilmington. He wore his fraud like cologne, sprayed it on thick, hoping no one could smell the rot underneath. But I could. I mapped every company he owned, every fake address, every woman he paraded around at fundraisers. And then I found the crack in his foundation. Her name was Lydia Voss. Ex-wife. Married 3 years. Divorced 2 years ago. The court records were sealed, but a couple of articles hinted at allegations of financial misconduct and irreconcilable differences. I found her through an old real estate listing she still managed in Savannah. I didn't call her. Not yet. I just watched. Collected. Next was his banker, a guy named Victor Lynn. He handled most of Troy's accounts out of a private bank in Charlotte. I paid $300 for a lunch meeting with one of Victor's former assistants through an anonymous site for consulting referrals. It wasn't illegal, but it wasn't entirely clean either. What I learned over that single espresso could have brought down a state senator. Troy wasn't just living large. He was about to launch a private equity fund, using my identity as one of his silent backers. He was going to raise millions under my name. On paper, I'd be listed as the primary investor, the majority shareholder, the man responsible for every dime. If it failed, and it would, they'd come for me. But I wasn't going to let it get that far. I'd let him hang himself. But first, I'd build the noose. And when the drop came, he'd never see the ground rushing up to meet him. I printed out every record, every connection, and tacked it to the wall of my small study. It looked like a crime board from a detective movie, but this wasn't fiction. This was war. He thought I was just some old man living by the sea. He was about to learn that I hadn't forgotten anything about how to win a war. Troy Landon thought he was a ghost. Invisible, untouchable. But I've hunted ghosts before, and I know exactly where to shoot. That night, I sat at my desk, the tide slapping gently against the pilings below. The moonlight stretched across the floor like a silver blade. My hands, once calloused from wrenching open-stuck aircraft hatches in the jungle heat, were steady again. I knew what I had to do next. Information is powerful, sure, but information used, that's where the real damage begins. So I chose my first target, Victor Lynn, not to hurt him, just to move him, rattle his cage. The man had been handling Troy's accounts for 3 years. He buried paper trails, massaged tax filings, laundered real estate investments through dummy LLCs in Nevada and Delaware. A quiet player. Smart. But too smooth. I needed him off the board. So I sent him something. An envelope, anonymous, clean, no fingerprints. Inside, for photocopies of documents only he and Troy should have had access to, a list of assets in my name, shell account routing numbers, and a sticky note with 4 words in neat, all-caps handwriting, "You're not invisible either." That was it. 2 days later, Troy's Instagram went dark. The usual power lunch selfies gone. No more stories about startup launches or yacht weekends. Radio silence. Victor had passed along the message. Panic had entered the bloodstream. Good. But this was just the appetizer. I still hadn't made contact with Lydia Voss, Troy's ex-wife. I'd tracked her movements for weeks, followed her online activity, her real estate work in Savannah. I watched her from a distance during an open house she hosted in a quiet waterfront neighborhood. She looked sharper than Troy ever had, business suit pressed, eyes guarded, fingers constantly adjusting her necklace like she was keeping a secret close to her heart. So I gave her a choice. She came out of the house after the last visitor left. I waited by the sidewalk, arms crossed, eyes calm. She noticed me immediately, not because I looked dangerous, but because I looked deliberate. "Can I help you?" she asked, hesitant. I nodded. "Only if you're ready to bury a man who already tried to bury you." Her eyes narrowed. I handed her a sealed folder. My name, her name, Troy's. "Read it when you're alone. Then call me. Or don't. But don't pretend you don't want this." Then I walked away. The next night, I got the call. It came in just after midnight, a time reserved for confessions and crimes. I let it ring twice, then picked up. "I want in," she said. No emotion. Just steel. We met at a diner off the interstate, a place too old to have cameras, too loud to eavesdrop. Lydia came prepared. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside, photographs, financial transfers, emails. Troy didn't just lie to the IRS. He lied to me. Cheated. Forged. He tried to move our marital assets offshore under his cousin's name. Got caught. That's why I filed. He begged me to keep it quiet. Said if the feds got involved, we'd both go down. And did you? I asked. She smiled bitterly. I let him think I would, but I kept copies, and now you've handed me the other half of the puzzle. We sat there for over an hour, exchanging details, syncing timelines, building the outline of something cold and lethal. I wasn't alone anymore. 2 days later, I got my first warning. It came in the form of a broken fence post. Nothing stolen. No footprints. Just the cedar post by my back porch, snapped and half cleaned through, like someone wanted me to know they'd been close enough to reach the house, but not dumb enough to break in. That was a mistake. They should have finished the job. Because now I was sure Troy knew someone was watching. And Troy, being who he was, didn't have the stomach for direct confrontation. He'd send someone else. A message with muscles. A threat in boots. Probably some ex-con cousin or a hired sleaze who owed him favors. I started sleeping with a tire iron beside the bed. Old habits come back fast when you've been hunted before. The next move was mine. I knew Troy's biggest asset, his P fund, was about to launch. He'd been courting investors under my name, falsifying documentation to make himself look backed by a decorated veteran with clean books and a long paper trail of success. Me, he didn't know I'd already contacted 2 of those investors. Quietly, anonymously, just enough to spook them. One email read, "Before you wire $500,000 to Mr. Landon's account, ask him to explain how his silent partner, Mr. Elias Warren, has a permanent fraud alert on his credit and recently filed a police report for identity theft." I signed it, a concerned citizen. Within 48 hours, the fund's public launch was delayed due to unforeseen legal review. 2 of the early investors ghosted him completely. One requested their pre-fund deposit be returned immediately. The cracks had started to show. The mask was slipping, but it was the voicemail that made it real. Late one night, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. I played it 3 times before deleting it. Troy's voice, tight, quiet, shaking with rage under the fake calm. "I don't know who you think you are or what you think you're doing, but you need to stop. Right now, before someone gets hurt. People like me don't fall. We multiply." He paused, then added, "You were just supposed to be a name." Not a problem. That was his mistake. I wasn't just a name. I was the storm rolling in. And he had no idea how long I'd been sharpening the lightning. He said I was just supposed to be a name. That's exactly what I was planning to become, the last name he ever wanted to hear. Troy's voicemail didn't shake me. It clarified things. Threats meant fear. Fear meant I was hitting nerves. He was unraveling, just slowly enough that he still thought he could bluff his way out of the fire. That's how narcissists fall, not in a blaze, but in pieces. One lie at a time. One ally lost. One illusion shattered. And I was ready to help gravity do its job. That week, Lydia and I began coordinating more directly. We met in parking lots, small-town diners, a library conference room in Wilmington where no one asked questions and the walls were thick. She brought emails. I brought banking records. Together, we built the timeline. Troy's empire was an illusion, and the scaffolding holding it up was me, my name, my credit, my signature on forged documents. But what mattered most was this. He was about to defraud people on a national level. And some of those people, they did care. That's when I called in a favor. The Navy taught me many things, but most of all, that no operation is solo. Everyone needs backup. So I reached out to Arthur Kane, retired investigator. Used to work federal fraud cases out of Raleigh. We'd met years ago on a consulting job. Arthur had a nose for deception and a Rolodex that scared some attorneys into silence. I told him everything. No secrets. No spin. He didn't interrupt. Just took notes on paper like he always did. When I finished, he said one thing. "If you want this to end in court, I'll help you build the evidence. But if you want it to end in silence, I'll make the calls." I didn't answer right away. I didn't know yet. So I just said, "Start with the evidence." The first thing Arthur found was damning. Troy had submitted a fraudulent investor profile to a defense contractor, hoping to score a consulting position linked to government funding. He used my background, my clearance history, my service number. The agency had flagged it as unverified and moved on, but the file still existed, with my name on it. Arthur filed a formal request and got a redacted copy sent to his office. That gave us what we needed: interstate wire fraud, identity theft, falsifying federal documentation. Enough to bury Troy 10 feet deep in federal prison. But that wasn't enough. Not for me. Because while I wanted justice, I also wanted remorse. I got my chance the following Thursday. Lydia tipped me off that Troy was holding a private investor dinner at a vineyard outside Durham. Nothing flashy, just a dozen hand-picked money men and one crooked host in a tailored suit. She managed to get me the guest list. 2 of the names I recognized, men who'd invested in questionable healthcare startups that never delivered. So I drove 4 hours, parked down the hill, away from the lights. Put on the suit Sandra had once picked for my retirement party. It still fit mostly. That night, I wasn't a widower or a veteran. I was the man behind the curtain, the ghost come to life. I didn't crash the dinner. That would have been dramatic. Sloppy, not my style. Instead, I left something behind. One by one, as guests mingled and sipped overpriced wine, the vineyard staff delivered small black envelopes with their names in silver ink. A touch of class. Inside, 1 page. Anonymous. Before investing with Troy Landon, ask to see proof of ownership for the properties listed in his pitch deck. Ask for legal documentation of his silent partner. Then ask yourself why the Department of Defense flagged his last application for material misrepresentation. No threats. No emotion. Just questions. Questions that devour liars from the inside. I didn't stay to see the fallout. I didn't need to. The next morning, Troy's lawyer issued a statement to his inner circle. Mr. Landon is reassessing current ventures due to a personal family matter, which meant he was bleeding investors. That afternoon, I got another message. This time, not a voicemail. An envelope under my front door. No return address. Inside, a photo of my mailbox, taken just hours earlier. Someone had driven all the way to my street. Watched. Waited. Below the photo, in cheap ink, "Back off, old man. You're playing with people who don't play fair." I stared at it for a while, then burned it in my sink. No calls to the cops. No panic. Instead, I checked my locks, loaded the pistol I'd kept in the closet since Sandra passed, and called Arthur. "We're getting close," I told him. "Too close," he said. "I think your boy is starting to look for exits. Let's give him a door," I said, and then shut it behind him. The next play had to be loud. Something public. Something that would make it impossible for Troy to keep pretending. So I went back to the beginning, the identity theft. With Lydia's help, we filed a report with the State Attorney General's office. Attached a full dossier, forged documents, timeline, emails, banking records. And we sent it with a copy to a local journalist Lydia knew, someone who owed her a favor from a previous real estate deal gone sideways. And then we waited. 2 days later, it happened. Local business column. Headline: Investor under fire for alleged identity fraud in P launch. Subheadline: Victim a decorated veteran. Criminal complaint filed. The article didn't name me, but it gave just enough detail to make it obvious. Anyone doing business with Troy would know. He was toxic now. That night, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Troy didn't waste time. "You think this is going to break me?" "No," I said calmly. "You did that yourself." I just pulled back the curtain. He was breathing hard. "What do you want?" I let the silence grow thick. "An apology?" he asked. "Too late." "Money? You want me to wire something to make this go away?" I laughed. "Once. Cold and short. You used my name. Now yours is the one being erased." Click. He thought the story going public was the final blow. He didn't realize that was just the introduction. Because the next phase wouldn't be about money. It would be about memory. I wasn't just going to bankrupt Troy Landon. I was going to make sure no one ever forgot what he really was. I've dismantled planes in the field during monsoon storms. I've rewired weapon systems in hostile territory with a flashlight in my mouth. So no, Troy Landon filing a lawsuit didn't scare me. It just confirmed he was losing. That morning, a courier knocked on my door. He didn't look me in the eye as he handed me the envelope. Civil tone, stiff posture, like he knew what he was delivering wasn't going to land soft. Inside, a cease and desist letter. Troy's lawyers accused me of defamation, unauthorized surveillance, and interference with professional contracts. It reeked of desperation. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to stall, delay the bleeding. I smiled and slid the papers into the fireplace. Let him burn his money on lawyers. I was playing a longer game. Arthur laughed when I told him. He's flailing, he said, trying to paint you as unstable. I've seen this before. Rich boys used to winning think lawsuits are like swords. Then it's time we take his sword away, I said. And we did. Arthur forwarded the cease and desist to the Attorney General's office, added it to the case file, and then called in a friend, a former IRS investigator who loved taking down tax cheats more than he loved fishing. Within 48 hours, Troy's finances were flagged for review. By the following week, his restaurant deal in Charlotte fell through. The investors pulled out. Seems no one wants to be on the same page as a man with a pending federal investigation. But Troy wasn't done. That Friday, someone broke into my house. Not to steal, to scare. They didn't touch anything valuable, just dumped my desk drawers onto the floor, opened all my kitchen cabinets, moved things. They wanted me to feel violated. Instead, I felt confirmation. They were panicking. Still, I didn't report it. Not yet. I did something better. I installed motion sensors, cameras, rewired my locks. And then, for the first time in months, I reached out to my nephew, Owen. He's a sheriff's deputy in Beaufort County. Big guy, steady hands, sharp eyes. Sandra always said he had a moral compass made of steel. I didn't ask for help. I asked for backup. He stayed at the house that night, just in case they came back. They didn't. Bullies don't like resistance. Or witnesses. While Troy scrambled in the dark, I took my next step. Lydia and I filed a formal claim to block the use of my name on any financial instrument, real estate, trust, corporate filing, anything. That triggered what's called an identity lockdown flag in 3 states. It meant Troy couldn't open a business, close a deal, or sign paperwork without getting flagged. And just like that, everything froze. His fund? Dead. His expansion plans? Canceled. And the best part? He couldn't tell investors why, without admitting he used a stolen identity to build it. Checkmate. But the real blow came later. Lydia found it, buried in an old hard drive she hadn't touched since the divorce. An audio recording. Back when they were still married, Troy had left a voice memo for his assistant, bragging about how he took care of the paperwork after my wife died. The old guy had no clue. I offered to close the estate, took a copy of his social. You'd be amazed what people hand you when they're grieving. His voice, his words, his arrogance. We both sat in silence as it played. Then I looked at her. Do you mind if I use that? She smiled, not sweetly, but like a woman who'd just sharpened a blade. Be my guest. I sent it to 3 people. 1, Arthur, for the state case. 2, my lawyer, for the civil suit I was about to file. 3, and Troy himself. No note. No explanation, just the audio. 2 minutes of his own voice admitting to a felony. He called within the hour. I didn't answer. Let him sit in his own voice for a while. Later that night, I took a walk along the docks. The tide was high, the water dark. I passed fishermen cleaning their gear, teenagers drinking beer in the backs of trucks, the kinds of people Troy would never understand. People who earn their lives. I sat on a bench overlooking the marina and thought of Sandra. She would have hated all this. The conflict, the schemes, the endless game of revenge. But she would have understood the need for it. She was the one who made me promise I'd never let anyone take advantage of me again. So I didn't. I got word a few days later that Troy's remaining accounts were frozen pending investigation. His passport was flagged for potential flight risk. And someone at the SEC had started asking questions. That's when the calls started again. Blocked numbers, hushed voices, some begging, some threatening. I didn't answer any of them, but I kept a log. Date, time, tone. That's the thing about people like Troy. They think if they raise their voice, they win. But I'd stopped hearing him months ago. He tried to scare me. He tried to sue me. He tried to erase me. And now, he was the one disappearing. From the headlines. From the investor circles. From the life he built on lies. And I was only halfway done. There's a point in every operation where the target stops running and starts sinking. That's where Troy Landon was now. Not falling, sinking. Slow, heavy, choking on the weight of his own lies. And I was done watching. It was time to finish this. Lydia and I met one last time before we pulled the trigger. An old library just outside of Raleigh. Neutral ground, no cameras, no curious eyes. We took the back table in the reading room, between the biographies and the military history. Fitting. She brought the final piece, a spreadsheet with over $1.3 million in fabricated transactions under my name. Some were linked to his failed fund, some tied to real estate purchases. A few even traced back to a charity Troy had registered, then quietly shut down months later. A charity for veterans. He used my background, my service, to siphon money from donors who thought they were helping men like me. That was the last line. You can steal my name, my savings, even try to rattle my front door, but you don't touch the flag I bled under. I folded the paper and slid it into my briefcase. This is the end, I told her. She nodded. He won't recover from this. No, I said. He'll try. But this time, I'm already waiting where he'll land. The next morning, I drove to Charlotte. Not to see Troy, but to attend a public forum where he was scheduled to speak. It was part of a business expo, small crowd, mostly suits and up-and-comers looking for funding or mentorship. Troy had been booked months ago to talk about entrepreneurial leadership in times of crisis. You couldn't write better irony if you tried. I took a seat in the second row. Quiet. Neutral. Just another old man in a blazer. A former consultant, maybe. No one gave me a second glance. Then Troy walked in. He looked thinner, paler. The confidence was still there, but it wore like a borrowed coat now, stiff at the shoulders, heavy at the seams. His eyes scanned the room. He didn't see me. Not yet. He took the mic and started with his usual charm. Smiled. Laughed. Used phrases like value alignment and growth integrity. It was garbage. All of it. But I let him speak. For exactly 12 minutes. And then I stood up. Mr. Landon, I said, loud enough to cut through the crowd. The room went still. His face twitched. You claim to value integrity. Can you explain how you acquired funding under a stolen veteran's identity? Or how your silent partner filed federal charges against you for identity theft and fraud? Whispers rippled. Phones came out. Troy froze. Stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. I walked closer. Pulled the folded paper from my briefcase. This is a list of fabricated accounts. All tied to your ventures. All under my name. Would you like to explain them to the audience? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The moderator tried to regain control. Sir, we ask. I held up a hand. I filed a federal complaint. I have legal representation. And unlike Mr. Landon, I've earned the right to be heard. Then I handed a stack of folders to the moderator. One for the press. One for the event organizers. One for the legal observers present. I'd checked beforehand, made sure they'd be there. Everything is documented. Dates, signatures, wire transfers. Including audio of Mr. Landon bragging about how he stole my identity while I was grieving the loss of my wife. Gasps. Shuffled seats. Someone stood up and left. And then I walked out. Just as Troy reached for the microphone again, hands trembling. By the time I got back to Oak Ridge Bay, the first headlines had already gone live. Business speaker confronted with fraud allegations during live event. Veteran accuses Charlotte entrepreneur of identity theft in public showdown. Investor darling now at center of federal inquiry. I didn't care about the press. That part was for everyone else, the ones he'd tricked, conned, silenced. The ones too afraid to speak. Now they had a voice. Mine. 2 days later, I got a call from Owen, my nephew. He didn't say much. Just, they served the arrest warrant this morning. Federal agents. He's being processed now. I thanked him and hung up. No celebration. No victory lap. Just silence. The kind of silence that comes after a long storm. The kind that lets you finally breathe. That evening, I stood on the back porch of my house. The sky was bruised purple and orange. Waves brushed the shore like a soft apology. I poured a glass of bourbon, Sandra's favorite bottle, and raised it toward the sea. "This one's done," I whispered. Not because I needed closure, but because I delivered consequences. The world doesn't hand you justice. You build it, brick by brick, file by file, strike by silent strike. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with a parade or fireworks. It arrives in envelopes, subpoenas, sworn statements, and the quiet cracking of a man's image under the weight of the truth. 3 weeks after Troy's arrest, the headlines were still rolling. He'd been charged with identity theft, wire fraud, tax evasion, misrepresentation on federal financial documents, and misuse of charitable funds. That last one hit harder than the others, because it showed people who Troy really was. Not just a liar, not just a thief, but someone who used good intentions as camouflage. Public donations meant to help veterans funneled into yacht leases, private chefs, designer watches. And he did it under the name of a man who actually served. Me. The preliminary hearing was quiet. Troy wore a navy suit that didn't fit quite right, probably borrowed. The press was kept at bay, but I noticed a young reporter scribbling furiously in the back row. He didn't look at me. Not once. His lawyer entered a plea of not guilty, as expected, but something in Troy's posture said otherwise. His shoulders were slouched. His cufflinks were mismatched. His eyes darted more than they blinked. Lydia sat beside me. She looked calm, elegant, like a woman who'd waited too long for this day. As we stood to leave, she whispered, "That's the last suit he'll wear for a long time." I nodded. If he's lucky, it'll be orange. Over the next few weeks, more came out. Former partners came forward. Anonymous investors. A personal assistant who'd been silenced by an NDA but decided her conscience was heavier than the fine print. Each story chipped away at what was left of Troy's reputation. Each voice added weight to the avalanche. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a parasite who had finally run out of hosts. And the final nail came from Victor Lynn, his private banker. Under pressure from investigators, Victor handed over emails, wire logs, and recorded phone calls, including one where Troy explicitly told him, "It's just an old man. I've got power of attorney. He won't even know we're using his name." That was a lie. I never signed a thing. Victor turned state's witness. Troy's lawyers stopped returning media calls. One morning, I got a letter. Official. Stamped. Return address from the Department of Justice. It confirmed the federal case had been formally scheduled for trial. But more than that, it notified me that I had been officially recognized as the primary victim in a criminal fraud case. There was a line at the end of the letter I read 3 times. "You may submit a statement to be read at sentencing, should the defendant be found guilty." A chance to speak, not to argue, not to threaten, but to define the final word on what he took from me and what he couldn't. I thought long and hard about that statement. I wrote it by hand, then typed it, then rewrote it again. This wasn't about venting. It was about clarity, and it needed to be simple. Here's what I submitted. My name is Elias Warren. I am a veteran, a husband, a builder, a man who spent his life trying to leave things better than he found them. Mr. Landon used my name to steal money, trust, and the dignity of my service. But he did not break me. He did not erase me. He did not win. Let that be remembered. That was all. I didn't need more. Sometimes the shortest lines cut deepest. 2 days later, I got an unexpected visitor. Bob Harrison. He'd driven down from Asheville. We met on my porch, same as always. 2 old men with coffee, watching the water. Bob pulled something from his jacket. It was a plaque. Simple wood. Gold plate. In recognition of Elias Warren for contributions to veteran rights and fraud prevention awareness. Turns out the local VFW and State Legal Aid Foundation had organized a campaign using my story to launch an outreach program for elder identity theft victims. My story, the one I hadn't wanted to tell at first. now helping others keep their names from being stolen. I took the plaque without a word, then nodded. Sandra would have liked that. The sentencing hearing was set for early fall. I didn't go, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to see him shackled to believe he'd lost. Instead, I walked the shore that day, let the Atlantic wind hit my chest. He got 6 years. Could have been more. Should have been. But justice isn't always full. Sometimes it's just enough. He'll serve time. He'll lose his name in the papers. He'll carry the weight. And when he gets out, his hands will be empty. Mine finally are free. You don't get even by becoming them. You get even by becoming untouchable, by standing taller than their lies, and walking away with your name still yours. They say when revenge is done right, it leaves you feeling whole. That's a lie. It leaves you standing in the ruins of what had to be done calm, yes, but never whole. Justice has a price. And I was starting to feel what I paid. Troy Landon was gone. 6 years in federal custody, plus asset forfeiture, plus a fraud record that would follow him into the grave. But the story didn't end there. Because the damage he did wasn't only numbers and paperwork. It had a face. Mine. It followed me into the bank, where they still double-checked my signature. It followed me to the pharmacy, where they flagged my ID as previously compromised. It followed me into quiet rooms and kind conversations, people still looking at me like I'd done something wrong. And no matter how clean the record, people flinch at the word fraud, even when you're the victim. Especially when you're the victim. Lydia and I met again after the sentencing. No lawyers. No files. Just two people who shared the same wound. She brought a pie. I brought whiskey. She didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in her posture, the tension that didn't ease, even after victory. Troy made us both question our instincts, she said finally. He used the parts of us we were proudest of. You trusted him, I said. And I was asleep at the wheel. She shook her head. No, you were grieving. I was blind. We sat in silence for a while. You ever wonder, she asked, if we could have stopped him sooner? I didn't answer, because I already knew the truth. We couldn't have. People like Troy don't stop when caught. They stop when cornered, when the walls are too high, the light too bright, the voices too loud to drown out. But there was one more thing we hadn't finished. 3 weeks later, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name, typed all caps. Inside, a single photograph. Sandra's wedding ring. The original. Not the cheap replica I'd found after the break-in. It sat on a cracked marble counter next to a wrinkled receipt from a pawn shop in Raleigh. The date was from over a year ago. That ring had been missing since the night someone rummaged through my house. Troy had pawned it. And now someone was sending it back. There was no note. No apology. Just the ring. And the quiet, unspoken message that someone, maybe Troy, maybe not, wanted me to know it was over. But I didn't believe in silence like that. I believed in closure. So I went looking. The pawn shop still existed. I drove out early in the morning, sun in my rearview mirror, air thick with southern heat. The place was nothing special, barred windows, dusty neon, a bell that rang when I opened the door. The man behind the counter barely looked up. But when I laid the photo on the glass, his eyes sharpened. Recognize this? I asked. He frowned, then nodded slowly. Yeah, bought that from some guy who came in shaking like a leaf. Said he needed gas money to get to a funeral. Real nervous. Didn't even haggle. When? Last summer. July. He had a beard. Sunglasses. But he left a copy of his license. The man reached under the counter, flipped through a ledger book like it was routine. Then he stopped, tapped the page. Here. It wasn't Troy's name. It was Nathan Keller. I blinked. That name wasn't in any file, any court record, any document. I took a photo of the ledger, thanked him, left, and then drove straight to Arthur Kane. Nathan Keller had a record. Nothing major, minor fraud charges in his 20s, some bankruptcy filings, bounced checks. But what stood out was this. He'd once worked as an IT consultant. And one of his known former clients? Troy Landon. That's when the rest started falling into place. The identity theft wasn't Troy alone. He'd had help. The technical side, spoofing emails, rerouting accounts, bypassing security verifications, all of that had been too clean, too professional. Keller was the ghost behind the screen. And he was still out there. Arthur dug deeper. We found a P.O. box in Georgia tied to one of Keller's LLCs. A burner phone registered under a fake name. A trail of proxy server IPs that led nowhere. But he wasn't gone. Just quiet. I didn't want revenge on Keller. I wanted the door closed. So I crafted one more move. I wrote him a letter. Typed. Anonymous. Simple. You've been seen. I know what you did. And I've kept the files. If you ever come near my name again, I won't call the feds. I'll call your mother. It was signed only, the man you tried to erase. Then I mailed it to the P.O. box. And that was that. Some battles end with noise. Others with silence. This one ended with both. Because I'd won, yes. But I'd also lost years of peace. Trust. The quiet illusion that I could grow old without ever being someone's target. But I was still here. And I still had my name. That fall, I started volunteering at a local VFW office, helping seniors set up identity protection, teach them how to flag suspicious accounts, avoid phone scams. I told them my story, the clean version. And when they asked how I caught the man, I'd just say I remembered who I was. And I made sure he did too. Some stories don't end with a bang. They end with a knock. It was a Thursday morning when I heard it. 3 short raps on the front door, just like Sandra used to do when she came back from town. Habitual, rhythmic, familiar. But it wasn't her. Of course it wasn't. I opened the door to find a man in his early 30s. Tall, shirt tucked in too neatly, hair combed with nervous precision. He looked like someone rehearsing manhood. "Mr. Warren?" he asked. I nodded. He cleared his throat, then extended a hand. "My name's Caleb Landon. Troy. Troy's younger brother." I didn't shake his hand, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I needed to know why he was here first. He stepped onto the porch, shifting from foot to foot. I found your name going through my brother's case file. I saw the statement you submitted to the court." I said nothing. He continued. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what he did, for what he stole. That man, he hasn't been part of our family in years." Still, I didn't respond. He reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I found something," he said. "It was hidden in one of his storage lockers. I thought you should have it." He handed it to me. Inside, a printed manuscript. Troy's memoir. Untitled. Unpublished. A draft full of crossed-out sentences, delusional chapters, and half-finished justifications. But one thing caught my eye. A paragraph near the end. I never thought the old man would fight back. That's on me. I underestimated him. But what shocked me more was that he didn't just come for the money. He came for my name. And he took it back like it had never belonged to me in the first place. I closed the folder. "Why are you really here, Caleb?" I asked. He looked down at his shoes. "To learn from you," he said. "To understand how you stayed calm while destroying him." That made me pause, because I'd never said I was calm. Just patient. I gave him coffee. We sat on the porch. Talked. He wasn't like his brother. At least not yet. He asked real questions. Listened. Took notes, literal notes, on a legal pad. Before he left, I said one thing. "Don't try to write your brother's redemption story." He nodded. "I won't." "But I knew you would. Writers can't help themselves." That night, I stood in my workshop, a small converted shed behind the house. The same place I'd spent hours rebuilding myself after Sandra died. The same place I mapped out every piece of Troy's destruction. And I opened a new folder. One last project. Not revenge. Legacy. I started recording. Not for the internet. Not for a book. Just for me. And maybe one day, someone like me, old, overlooked, thinking the world had passed him by. I told the whole story. The theft. The investigation. The court case. The silence afterward. And then I said this. They took my name. So I took back my voice. And I used it like a scalpel. You don't need fists to fight back. Just memory. Just truth. And a spine made of something they can't steal. A month passed. Then a letter came, this time from prison. The handwriting was sloppy, the paper folded badly, but it was from Troy. Inside was one line, "I never thought you'd go this far." And below it, "You win." No apology, no remorse, just recognition. It wasn't satisfaction I felt reading that. It was clarity, because that line, "You win," meant he finally understood this wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I never wanted his money or his suffering. I just wanted my name back. And now I had it. I framed the letter, hung it beside the American flag folded from Sandra's funeral, not as a trophy, as a warning to anyone who thought the quiet man at the end of the road wasn't paying attention. You see, people like Troy think they can rewrite reality, but truth doesn't fade. It waits. And when it's ready, it doesn't scream. It whispers. I remember you. Elias Warren, 61, builder, veteran, survivor. He got his name back and made sure no one could ever take it again.